This is the first time I'm doing this. Kind of feel hyped for it, but I don't know. Still a little sick. Sort of just testing it out. Just wanted this sort of things just to talk about my opinions on like shows and movies and just general concepts and stories. And I should definitely preface this though. The reason that I'm making this was sort of I rewatched all of Star Wars, like a week or so, a week or two back during the weekend, and I sort of realized, wow, a lot of it's just, a lot of it's terrible. And, that doesn't sound right. It might sound controversial and whatever, but, I don't care. But it sort of comes down to, like, there's a lot of in like the later movies in the later shows that Disney produces, of course, are trash because well, I have my own gripes with Disney since about I was hating Disney before it was popular. I'll just put it that way. But suffice to say, my gripes with it aside, I just also noticed that there was a lot of stuff in universe that I don't like the Clone Wars and other movie series also in the movies even to an extent also sort of just like they stepped on and they severely drastically messed up and I sort of wanted to choose a particular topic for today at least and look at Star Wars, and I sort of just want to look at the particular concept of hyperspace, which is, well, okay, I have a bit of knowledge on this, so hypothetically, hyperspace would work by a three-dimensional object manipulating three-dimensional space in such a way that it enters a fourth dimensional or some sort of higher dimensional, which can often be called extra-dimensional, super-dimensional, hyperdimensional, but some sort of higher spatial dimension wherein the rules of relativity, that being of space-time, don't work the same in our universe or in standard space-time. And okay, I'll put it this way. If you're operating like in the real world, if you consider the notions of this, which I'll touch on later, if you consider the notions of travel, of the speed of light not being constant, you also have to remember that mass being converted to energy is because of that constant, and that the reason mass and energy are interchangeable is they're connected by the speed of light squared. And if you alter the speed of light, you're altering a universal constant. People don't seem to understand that when they're writing or just in general. Conceptually, the speed of light isn't just the speed. It's a universal constant, and it's also the speed limit of information is a really good way I've heard it described. But suffice to say, in Star Wars, there it works different, or the speed of light's the same inside the physical universe, and a more accurate term or phrasing I should say technically would be within the Star Wars galaxy. The speed of light is most probably equivalent to ours, or at the very least some form close to it, which explains why they travel into hyperspace, as they are bypassing the speed limits that the normal space, or real space as it's called, impose. Now, an important sort of prerequisite to that concept is that Disney bought Star Wars. Well, not I should rephrase that. An important prerequisite to this concept of hyperspace is that Disney bought Star Wars, meaning there are two different canons. This is fairly common knowledge. Legends and canon. Disney's trash has been called the canon, or they consider it the canon. But there's also exists legends, and yeah. So conceptually, hyperspace is is higher dimension. So higher dimension is higher dimension. Caveman English. So when you enter hyperspace, and you travel through hyperspace, whilst it is significantly faster than the speed of light, I'm sure there's some video going over the statistics or the numeric values behind said light speed traveling. The speed of this traveling in Star Wars, it's not instantaneous. Or excuse me, I'll rephrase that. Within the original trilogy, hyperspace, whilst a sci-fi concept and somewhat disconnected from the actual conceptual implications, if it were in like our world, was not instantaneous. We even know this by the fact that Luke and Obi-Wan traveling to the Death Star, um, they or well, not the Death Star, but to save Leia and whatnot. It wasn't instantaneous. He had a training sequence. You could argue anywhere that trip took anywhere from half a day to a few hours. Um, I I personally based off of sort of the novels, such as the Thrawn duology, I want to say, where they were like in hyperspace for a few weeks, I believe. I'd say that they were probably in hyperspace for at least 4 to 5 hours, and possibly on the half a day range. Just because it feels like that's realistic time. That's a realistic time to me, at least. But yeah. So hyperspace wasn't instant. It was very effective means of travel, but it wasn't by any means instantaneous. And I'm sure there are videos that go over it. But if you wanted to cross the galaxy in Star Wars per se, narratively, it would take you. Well, not narratively, chronologically, it would take you a few weeks, which means narratively, if you're fighting a battle, Tatooine, that's pretty far. Yeah, Tatooine, or you're fighting in maybe wild space or the unknown regions. Like, let's say you're fighting the Chiss in the Chiss Ascendancy. It would take you a few weeks to go from Coruscant to the Chiss Ascendancy, and that sort of time, that consistent time frame, creates a standard, and it also creates this opportunity within the story, because it's this idea of, you can't if someone's far enough away, it's going to take a few weeks for us to get supplies. That sort of brings a whole new level of stakes. It's no longer, we just have to wait till the supply ship gets here. We have to wait and fight it out. This could be weeks. And here's another thing I should add about hyperspace. When you're traveling in hyperspace, you're not going to stay in hyperspace continuously. From what I'm understanding, if I've read everything correctly, when you do hyperspace jumps. So you travel large. In I mean, this is also for like hyperspace lanes too. And space is constantly moving, which is another thing. So you do hyperspace jumps. You jump, let's say 15,000 light years. You then go back into real space, move into the next hyperlane or area where you can access hyperspace properly, and then you jump and presumably repeat the process or reach your destination. Which is, again, this is a fascinating concept, and it sort of undermines the whole eighth movie's hyperspace tracking, which is another story. But it's this idea that if you're jumping into hyperspace, you're probably going to have to jump out at some point in order to change your trajectory, so you can head to wherever you're trying to head to, which then becomes like, if you're at I don't know, no, this would be a bad example. If you're at Naboo or some other world, you can make it this idea that it's at the end of a hyperspace route. So it's wherever you're jumping from, you're gonna jump from one space to another, and then where they're gonna jump out in real space. So you could either set up fleets and groups to assault them, or it brings a whole another level of stakes, because again, and it brings another concept into this into Star Wars, where it's this idea of, does a ship even have to fly back into a hangar? Just have the ship attach onto the ship, or have a starfighter attach onto the hull of a ship, or have a starfighter cable onto a ship, sort of like the I-400 submarine, where it had the hook that grabs a ship, which would really tie back into the World War II aspect and theme in the dogfighting within Star Wars, where the ship literally hooks on. You jump into hyperspace and flee whatever battle, and then once you go into real space, the ship can dock normally, and the pilots can get onto the ship, and they'll have only waited in the cockpit for a maximum of maybe a few hours. That tangent aside, um, the first sort of violators of Star Wars hyperspace are unfortunately the first, second, and third movies. The primary example I can think of was Obi-Wan. He traveled from Utapau to, let's see, I'm pretty sure it was Utapau to Coruscant, and he subsequently traveled to Mustafar to face Anakin before traveling to some, I don't remember where the Padme had the twins, but it was somewhere. I think that the location she had them was like an asteroid, so there's a chance that it wasn't too far. But like Utapau to Coruscant, I'm sure, and again, I'm sure someone's done the numbers or the math on it, or at the very least the distance. But a trip like this should be taking, even with a .5 hyperdrive, I would argue it's something like this should be taking a few days. With a class 1, it would probably take maybe a week or two or something like that. But General Grievous's starfighter, I actually looked this up beforehand, has something like a class 6 hyperdrive. That's not even a Imperial Star Destroyer has a class 2. So I really don't understand, like, that a class 6 is slower than the Death Star, which is for all intents and purposes a megastructure moon, a super weapon, and it's not concerned with mobility. So this thing's moving slower than a literal 62 mile, 100-kilometer wide battle station that blows up planets. And so it's really like, okay, at this point, you might just go, okay, the data books or the data guides need to be more consistent and look at the logistics of the Star Wars universe. But then it becomes a matter of that canonical consistency is solidified by certain shows. Like if you show a show like the Clone Wars show, which I won't get into the whole Filoni canon mess, but like once a show like that shows the General Grievous' starfighter or something like that, then it becomes this you're setting up this false conception around hyperspace travel. And to tie into that, I actually want to touch into the most absurd concept within Star Wars, or arguably one of them, which is not hyperspace ramming, but rather light speed skipping.
You ever gonna go?
Claude, I hope you fixed that surge. T-5, R2. Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally. A spy in the First Order.
Spy. Who?
I don't know. Transfer the message. Get it to Leia. Hurry.
This could be big, R2.
Locked on target.
We're about to be cooked! We're almost there! Oh, we got it! How do we thank you?
Win the war.
big we can boulder these times. It was just... Oh, I know! What are you doing? Light speed skipping. How do you know how to do that?
That's a good question. Is that a reflection?
Ray's not here, is she? Last jump, maybe forever. Hold on!
Alrighty, so I rewatched the scene, of course, to try and gain the full nonsensical, completely idiotic context behind it, and Poe introduces the idea of light speed skipping. Now, I'll admit the when I watched the movie at the time, the idea sounded extremely cool. This whole idea that you could just jump into hyperspace and then out and in and out and in and out and in and out. And to tie back into the real world, something like this is conceptually possible. Conceptually possible because mass is in our dimension, presumably, unless higher dimensional gravity was somehow a factor or proven a factor, but we wouldn't have to worry about gravity or anything in a higher dimension affecting us. For all intents and purposes, a four-dimensional transportation system, you would simply enter the higher dimension, bypass any physical and arguably even temporal limitations, but purely physical or spatial, we'll say, and you could end up in, I don't know, you could end up on the 63rd floor of the Burj Khalifa, or you could end up in the basement of the CIA or wherever you want, because it's a fourth dimension. A fourth dimension permeates the entirety of our three-dimensional space, intersects it, and is also beyond it, meaning you could travel at vectors that directly bypass it. But yeah, like conceptually, that's how hyperspace could work in a story. However, that's not established in Star Wars. In Star Wars, hyperspace is parallel to actual space, meaning that the gravity of certain objects, the mass of them, creates mass shadows or gravity shadows within hyperspace that, if they are not avoided, not only will pull you out of hyperspace, but if you're near them and you're still in hyperspace, you could also crash into them, meaning you could crash into a star in another dimension, in this higher dimensional space or other dimensional space, and no one would know, and the star wouldn't be affected. There would be no signs of it within our normal space or real space, as I'll call it, as it's called. And that's sort of a terrifying concept. That's why Han says it's not like dust and crops. If you fail to make the right calculation, even something such as, I don't know, a moon, a small moon, or maybe, even if you wanted to get into hypersemantical something, like a battle station large enough, hint hint, a battle station large enough or something like that, you could just crash into it and then you're done for. Of course, analyzing it realistically, there has to be a mass threshold where it becomes dangerous versus if you crash into it or you won't crash into it. Otherwise people would just crash into ships, enemy ships or fleets, or the Death Star in hyperspace or through hyperspace, and just cause them to explode like that. Or even just a planet. Well, no, not a planet, because a planet would be significantly larger, but something like a battle station doesn't have enough mass that you could crash into it or its hyperspace mass shadow, which again, only the mass shadow would be interacting with you, not the actual object. But anyways, Finn jump. So the first and foremost, Finn's right. Where did he learn this? Conceptually, this is the most stupid, dangerous thing someone could ever tell you. It would be like me telling you to move a ship at some 10,000 miles per hour at ground level. the amount of buildings, tumbleweeds, any number of things you could crash into and just, it'd be fatal. And then it's just like that's what's first the first part, that's what's insane to me. And he's jumping into these planetary atmospheres. So I don't know how that works either. We even see where he's in some sort of he goes onto some planet that has some sort of city structure, which even if it's something like Cloud City, yikes, that's still dangerous. I'd imagine there's some sort of sonic boom or something of other. But even if something like that conceptually doesn't exist within the Star Wars universe, you're at the if you're not very precise with this, if you're milliseconds off, you could crash into cities or planets, or and your trip ends. And again, once you're in the presence of something with gravity, it used to be that you just couldn't jump into hyperspace until you were out of that gravity range. But Disney canon says that interdictors simulate gravity, and because of hyperspace or hyperdrive mechanisms or failsafes, it won't allow you to jump, but you can disable those. So, I mean, I don't like retcons like that just so you can, just because you told a story poorly or you told another man's story poorly. But even if that were the case or that was true, you'd think light speed skipping would have some sort of limitation or some sort of other, like, danger. Like, you can crash into a planet, and for populated zones, there's no way that I would even consider letting someone just enter, or like, there'd be some sort of law against light speed skipping. That's just reckless endangerment at worst. And if you have a terrorist, 9/11's gonna look like 9/11's just gonna look like, a candlelight compared to a ship traveling at hyperspace, or now hyperspeeds, through a city. And here's what's also interesting, but I don't know if this like immediately registers with people as much, but when he's traveling through the First Order TIE fighters, which TIE fighters don't have hyperdrives, but they're newer models, so we'll pretend they do. Let's say they have some form of hyperspace technology. Well, they're also too small to fit a hyperdrive. But again, we'll play the Disney game. Even within their own story and canon, this still doesn't make logical sense as a concept because, again, hyperspace tracking. What happened to that? We saw that the computer required its own massive room. It required batteries. I'm pretty sure the computer was. I had the guide at one point, the guidebook for the 8th movie. The computer is partially itself within hyperspace. So, and this thing required the power. It was on a not Super Star Destroyer, Mega Star Destroyer. This 13-kilometer behemoth. This thing's what? 13 kilometers. How many miles is that? It's over what? That's what, a 6 to 10 mile long battleship. 6 to 10 mile long battleship that's powering this computer that this computer is stored on. It and last I checked, the Holdo maneuver laid waste to the supremacy. So I'm not sure if they salvaged the computer, because even if they did, there's no sign of a capital ship that's following the Millennium Falcon. There's which it should be if it's trying to head back to base. I would want something capable of orbital bombardments to follow them, not just some TIE fighters. But that's more so a tactics gripe. TIE fighters don't have hyperdrives, and they certainly don't have the room to fit hyperspace tracking technology. And if you want to go, well, they're just looking at the hyperspace lanes and predicting where they go. They can't get that right every time. One and two, he's light speed skipping. Light speed skipping. The most similar concept to light speed skipping would be something like hyperspace micro jumps, wherein you jump extremely small distances via turning on your hyperdrive for. It's very specific. I'd have to go over like the Thrawn novels again to really really elaborate on that. But it's like making extremely small distance jumps with the hyperdrive, and it's like, what's going on here, Disney? Where's your internal consistency? And yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. But on that note, I sort of considered been considering, I should say, over the last month, 2 months, about, science fiction and hyperspace and sort of faster than light travel in general. And I've sort of come up with a series of questions for regarding that faster than light travel in specific. And I sort of just have them jotted down, or the key concepts and words jotted down. And it's sort of like, the first question is, well, here's some fundamental first questions that I didn't write down. What is your faster than light system? Is there more than one? If there's more than one, which one, if either, is more prevalent or more popular? Which one should be more prevalent or more popular? Why is that one more prevalent or popular? Why are there or are there not groups looking into other methods of hyperspace or faster than light travel? If there are, then you need to make sure that there are narratives around that, and that there are conceptual implications and connotations behind that. But yeah, there's also how much faster it is. Is it a consistent system? For example, Star Wars has recently made it zero consistency. I won't even go into the Acolyte or any other of the other butcherings of Disney, but this hyperspace is fairly inconsistent in Star Wars now. Whereas in Star Trek, we know warp takes, warp 1, warp 2, warp 3. We know that it would take decades to cross the galaxy with even a fast warp drive, with the fastest warp drives of the Federation. That's why they introduced new types of warps and new types of faster than light travel. But now's not the time to look at Star Trek. But in contrast, the warp from Warhammer 40K was never consistent. It's, for all intents and purposes, like nightmare space, oblivion, sort of like hell, whatever you want to call it, wherein these ships travel through it, but there's no guarantee. Well, they have the technologies to defend the ships, but there's also no real guarantee that you come out the exact time or place you want. You can end up in the past, the future. You can end up a little far off in the galaxy, in the middle of nowhere. It is limited to the galaxy for reasons that I've somewhat forgotten, as I'm not entirely familiar with Warhammer 40k, only some of the basic concepts and structures behind it. But yeah, Warhammer 40k, I kind of like that. It's not a consistent faster than light thing, and I kind of appreciate it because it's a story thing, and you have to be creative with it, and you have to be creative with it, and you also don't have to explain all the time that, oh, it's because this or it's because that. It's random somewhat. So back to the questions. Does your faster than light system FTL need a distance to travel? Originally, you couldn't be in the planetary gravity range, or stars' gravity range, or major celestial bodies' gravitational pull in order to travel. So, do you need a range? Do you need to be out somewhat into the interstellar void? Can you just jump off from atmosphere, which I have actually seldom seen, because like friction drag would probably be terrible, which is another problem with the whole speed skipping. But do you need a distance to travel FTL? More importantly, how long does travel take? Does it take how long does travel take is also connected to sort of like the scope. So if you're writing something like a sci-fi story, typically the reason sci-fi authors stay in the galaxy range, and this is somewhat sort of a jab at them. They're somewhat scared to write a universal range or a universal story, because then it's like, realistically, if someone said, I'm traveling X amount of light years or billion light years in a few hours or days across the universe, you'd go, what? That's insane. That's faster than Star Wars. That's faster than anything. And it's like, it's sort of like a big implication if you're writing it, or if you're writing that, because you're traveling extremely fast. But how long does it take? If you're going to stick to the galactic scale, can anyone go to any other part of the galaxy in hours, days, minutes, seconds? Because if they can, that drastically shrinks the size of your galaxy, makes everything feel much closer, much more at home. But in contrast, if there are certain regions of space or certain galactic or imperial groups that go, we don't allow this sort of faster than light technology to function within our space or to use within our space, then it becomes, oh, well, you have to actually travel the distance between these locations, or you have to find some other way that's not as fast, and then that's story opportunities, you know? Here's a really unique question. The properties of space. So, what I've noticed in Star Wars, and this is speculation, somewhat, but there might be grounds or there might be canonical, evidence. Star Wars space seems to operate like a medium. If you notice in the Star Wars, the Last Jedi movie, when a ship runs out of fuel, it doesn't keep moving forward. It sort of stops in that place, which isn't how it would work in our real space, because an object in motion will stay in motion, which means hypothetically for someone like, Leia or like the Resistance, if their space worked like ours, you would just press your engines. Well, no, you wouldn't constantly use fuel. You'd want to divide your fuel usage into bursts, or maybe even, try gravitational planetary slingshots. But assuming that that wouldn't work or doesn't exist, you'd want to do your fuel in bursts. So it's like, you're accelerating for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, and then you travel hundreds of thousands of kilometers without using fuel. And then you do that again and again and again. Now, you might argue they might decelerate to a point that the First Order can catch up, but the Mega Star Destroyer was extremely slow, so I'd argue no. But this isn't an attack, actually. This is actually an observation. What if Star Wars space, just how it has a light speed limit, it also has some sort of ether or some sort of medium? The whole concept of the luminiferous ether, whilst disproven in our world and in our science, stated that perhaps there was a space, or there's this medium through which light travels, in this medium permeates everything, and it's also in space. If Star Wars has something like that, or some sort of medium or ether, then that also means that when they're traveling through it or traveling in ships in Star Wars, if a ship isn't constantly using thrust, then it will stop, because there's this medium that's providing microscopic friction against it. And when you have a larger ship, larger area for friction to operate upon. Now, there are also some other scenes in Star Wars that make me think this, not just the Star Wars 8th movie. So there exists that. But yeah, what are the properties of space? Is space in any way connected to a sentient entity? Can entities be literal space itself? Can space be manipulated like water? Is it more like air? Is it more akin to a solid? That, if you want to use those sort of rudimentary element or matter state comparisons, like, what is space? What are the properties of space? Does space have, what are the properties? Another thing to consider, again, how consistent the FTL is. Does it take forever? Is it instant? Is it always forever? Is it always instantaneous? Is it always a few days? Can an FTL system be rigged to go faster, or is there a set limit? If there is a set limit, then you can establish stories or moments wherein that set limit proves to be a challenge that the group has, or that the protagonist has to overcome, or the protagonist has to adapt to. There are some other questions I have written down that aren't related to that. What's the speed of light is a good question though. If the speed of light is something that is, the same as ours, then obviously you need some sort of way to bypass that with FTL. But if the speed of light is faster, or if it's slower, then you can go the ship can just travel that fast. And you know, uh, oof. ah, here's another one that I kind of like. FTL communication, faster than light communication, method of communication. Um, Something I've noticed is that holocron, no, not holocron, holographic communication in Star Wars. That's what I'll call it. Holonet. Unlike hyperspace and unlike hyperdrives, those appear to be instantaneous. They're both in real time, as we've even seen Darth Sidious choke Count Dooku from some portion across the galaxy in real time, and it was instant. So that just means Star Wars has an instantaneous communication network or method, but it doesn't have instantaneous travel, which again ties back into a story that you're writing. If the communication is instant, then that means there should be no information gap or information wall. But again, let's go back to that planetary siege. You can communicate you need supplies instantaneously, but that your ship's gonna take a few weeks to arrive after that. Or let's say, actually, here's a really interesting concept. Let's say your communications travel slower. Communications are slower than your spaceships or your space travel systems. Then you'd have to, well, one interesting concept would be sending drones. You'd send drones through hyperspace, or you create drones or messenger ships with warps so that they can deliver messages at a presumably exponentially quicker rate. But then it becomes, can those messages be intercepted? Can you track the drones or ships? If drones or ships are that necessary, would there be some sort of treaty around not shooting them down? Would there be an idea of maybe like, okay, pirates might try to hijack, again, hyperspace example, you have to jump in and out of hyperspace and real space. A messenger might have to jump into real space momentarily and realign to go before going back into FTL. Would a pirate try taking the drone or the ship? Would someone try creating fake drones with messages so that they could manipulate, I don't know, the intergalactic banking clan stocks or something like that? It really opens up a lot of opportunities with stories when you go FTL isn't instantaneous, FTL is instantaneous. That was my shortest question. Why not FTL RAM? If you can really move at faster than light speeds, and we've seen in the Star Wars 8th movie, why wouldn't you ram someone at hyperspace speeds? It's a really effective tactic, all things considered. At the it's very effective on a ship that, in theory, could have tried to move or thrust her out away to an extent. Though it is also a massive mega star destroyer, so I don't know how much thrust it would need given all of that. But imagine a literal planet or a star for a target instead. Why didn't the Empire just instead of making those dozens of thousands of star destroyers, why not make, maybe hundreds of thousands or even millions of hyperspace missiles, and the Star Wars Legends universe exists for that, so I guess that the concept's there. But why wouldn't that be hyper prevalent? What's to stop someone from using weapons that have hyperluminal or superluminal methodologies of thrust or propulsion? I would love to hit an enemy or an enemy star system with a missile going 90,000 times the speed of light. At that point, the kinetic energy, assuming it retains that at hyper speeds, the kinetic energy alone would be devastating to cities, mountains, planets, star. Maybe even if you hit something hard enough, you could disrupt a star. But yeah, why not? Why aren't there hyperspace rams? Why aren't there hyperspeed or hyperspatial weapons? Another one, how does your FTL work? Which is sort of just what all of these questions fall under, but how does it work? Is your hyperspatial method natural or is it artificial? Which actually ties into my favorite question, or some of my favorite questions, interdicting faster than light. If it is possible to go at faster than light speeds, is it similarly possible to force someone out of faster than light speeds? And more importantly, can you force them into it? Everyone talks about how dangerous it would be to fight an empire, the Galactic Empire, and an interdictor shows up. Well, what would be worse than an interdictor? Some sort of, I don't know what the opposite of interdicting is. Passer? Interceder? I don't know. Imagine a ship that could instantly activate your faster than light system. And remember, for Star Wars, you need specific vectors and orientations and jumps in order to do it right, so you don't crash into planets or black holes or stars. So, imagine someone could just instantly activate your hyperdrive. At that point, you wouldn't want a hyperdrive. You wouldn't want a hyperdrive that's on your ship at the very least, which ties into hyperspace rings, which were a cool concept, but highly underutilized within both canon and legend. If you have this sort of ability to force someone to go faster or slower than light by maybe like faster than light, superluminal agitator, that's what I'm gonna call it. Superluminal and subluminal agitation. If you can force someone to go slower than light, what's to stop? Why didn't the Empire make an entire? Why didn't every Empire fleet have interdictors? Because I'm not sure of the specifics, but I'm pretty sure interdictors existed significantly before the Galactic Empire. If you really have this technology, why wouldn't you want to pull a fleet out of hyperspace? We've seen it in Rebels that the ship also doesn't come back in its normal orientation. It comes back sort of slanted, sort of shaken up. So you're not only disorienting your enemy, you're disorienting your enemy, but you're also forcing them back into a battle. And if someone's trying to go into hyperspace, they're probably trying to avoid a battle with you. So, if you can interdict faster than light, why not try to? And more importantly, if you can force something to go faster than light, which I'm not sure if anyone's ever done in sci-fi, I've sort of toyed with the concept. There was sort of this idea I had where it would be hyperspace was a normal method until the ability to force someone's hyperspatial technology to activate required everyone to use wormholes or like worm gates or something instead, because imagine you crash into hyperspace on a planet or in atmosphere, or you're in between two moons or something like that. Which all leads to what I'll make the last question, because I don't want to go on forever. Is the speed of light malleable? The three body problem, I believe, is one of the very few science fiction series that deals with this. But if you can alter the speed of light, or if you could alter the speed of light or the universal constant in some way or form, you could travel faster than light, because, well, duh. If you're traveling faster than if you make the speed of light 10% slower and you're at 99% the speed of light, you're 110% the speed of light now, because it's 99 over 90, 11 over 10. But that's sort of like the final concept I have. If you can you alter the speed of light within real space or within other dimensional spaces, which is sort of enters the or not enters the exits the sci-fi, somewhat exits sci-fi, but at the same time it could still be in sci-fi if you keep the rest of it grounded. But it's definitely one of those more out there concepts where it's like we're making a relativity field, for lack of a better term, or a relativity space or tunnel, wherein the speed of light is 1/100,000th of what it normally is, which would cause you to, well, that means if you were, let's say you achieved light speed flat, assuming you achieved light speed flat, or assuming that when you're altering the speed of light, you then are able to travel at any speed, period, as long as you were above it initially, you're 100,000 times faster than light, which that means you could cross our galaxy end to end within a single year, which is highly impressive, all things considered. But yeah, if is the speed of light alterable? Is it malleable in any way, shape, or form? If it is, firstly, props to you because you're introducing a whole other dimension of storytelling. And then it becomes this idea of if the speed of light is alterable or is malleable in some way, shape, or form, you're gonna first want to press that to the limit. Imagine you could make okay, calculus concept, okay, limits. Imagine rather than making the speed of light simply something like 1/3 or something like that, you could make the speed of light approach zero. Firstly, again, the speed of light is a universal constant, so you're also going to affect how matter and energy convert and transform inside that space, which is something you could touch on as a concept within your story, but just something to either keep in mind or to, like find some sort of technobabble that goes um, matter energy interchangeability is not altered during this because XYZ laws of causality or because space time yada yada or blah blah blah. But if you can alter the speed of light within a ship or well not within a ship but like within a ship space or around a ship, then it becomes like how big could you make it too? Because here's a really interesting concept that I also don't really see touched on a lot. Or, well, decently in sci fi, but not nearly enough. If you have hyperspatial travel or FTL travel, why wouldn't you try to move entire planets or star systems? This Mega Star Destroyer is a great super weapon, but at the end of the day, it's just a ship, which is downplaying it because it's basically mega structure, but that's a whole other thing. But the Yu Zhang Vong, Star Wars Legends, had these huge 100-kilometer spiral ships, and it's like that. It really introduces a whole other level of scale. Now, if you try moving planets, actual moons, not battle stations that look like moons, actual moons, entire star systems, it which I sort of just this is sort of just a lead into another idea. How big can your FTL get? Can your FTL move ships that are a few kilometers, a few hundred meters, or could you put a hyperdrive on a planet? And that sort of ties into the whole idea of how big can ships get, which is a whole other thing that I'll talk about. Maybe in another like video podcast, whatever thingy, whatever these are. But yeah, if you could alter the speed of light, like really, you really look at the implications of that, and then look at the range of effect of this speed of light alteration. And then if you're really altering the speed of light, would it be something like it wears off slowly, it wears off with the time given in the universe, or like what? But I guess that's sort of just a wrap up to this whole like um sort of yap session really, but like sort of look at or analysis of faster than light, primarily within the Star Wars universe, but also on a somewhat larger, broader context or scale. Peace.